I remember the silence before the first shell fell. That's what stays with me, even now in this Medicaid ward where the air tastes of counterseptic and recycled sweat. The silence. For 17 seconds, the entire hive went quiet. The manufactorums stopped their grinding. The ventilation systems paused their eternal wheeze. Even the hymnal broadcasts from the ecclesiarchy spires ceased their droning praise. 17 seconds. I counted them. We all did, those of us in sub-level 47, packed into the textile works where I'd spent the last decade of my life feeding synthetic fibers into machines older than my grandfather's grandfather. The sudden quiet was so complete, so absolute, that I could hear my own heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I could hear Morella breathing beside me, her exhalations sharp and quick. I could hear the click of Overseer Ven's augmetic jaw as it processed some sub-routine command. Then the world exploded. The first impact hit somewhere in the upper hive. I know this because we felt it rather than heard it, a sensation like the entire structure shuddering, like some massive beast had been struck. The floor beneath my feet rippled, actually rippled like water, and I watched the loom stations dance and crash against each other. The sound came after, rolling down through kilometers of rockcrete and plasteel, a roar that started low and built until it felt like my skull would crack from the pressure. The emergency klaxons joined in, their shrieking barely audible above the thunder. Red light flooded everything, turning the familiar grey walls into something that looked like the inside of a wound. I grabbed onto my workstation habit, the trained response of someone who'd weathered hive quakes before, but this was different. The shaking didn't stop. It just kept going, getting worse, and through the din I could hear the unmistakable sound of metal tearing. Overseer Ven was screaming something, his vox amp cutting in and out, but the words were lost. Not that it mattered. We all knew what to do. The administratum had drilled it into us every month for as long as I could remember. In the event of external attack, remain at your stations. Continue production. The Emperor protects. The Emperor provides. Maintain output quotas. I saw Jarek actually try to obey. He was at his station 2 rows over, hands still moving through the threading sequence even as the ceiling began to crack. A chunk of reinforcement spar fell and crushed his left side, and he was still trying to work with his right hand when the second impact hit. This one was closer. I felt the heat of it through the walls, a sudden furnace blast that made the air shimmer. The west wall buckled inward, and I watched it happen in what felt like slow motion, the way the plasteel warped, the way the support ribs snapped one after another like fingers being broken. Behind it, something was glowing orange. Fire. The atmospheric seals were breached. I could smell it now, the acrid burn of promethium, the sharp metallic tang of vaporized metal. Someone was screaming. Maybe it was me. The floor tilted, and suddenly I was sliding. We were all sliding, toward the breach in the wall where fire was beginning to lick through. Morella grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug in hard enough to bruise, hard enough that I still have the marks. She was shouting something about the emergency evacuation shafts, but I'd never seen them. 10 years in this textile works, and I'd never once been shown an evacuation route. Why would they? Where would we go? The hive was everything. The hive was all. We were sub-level 47 workers, registered with the administratum, assigned to this sector. Our ration chits came from this workplace. Our sleeping pods were 3 levels down. The idea of evacuation was abstract, meaningless, like being told to evacuate from your own body. But the floor was still tilting, and the fire was spreading, and when the third impact hit, it was close enough that I saw the flash through the breach in the wall. White light, so bright it burned after images into my vision. The shockwave came a heartbeat later, and it picked me up, actually lifted me off my feet, and threw me into the sorting bins. I remember the sensation of flight, that brief moment of weightlessness, and then the impact that drove all the air from my lungs. I tasted blood. Something in my chest had broken. I could feel it grinding when I tried to breathe. The world was spinning. Or maybe I was spinning. It was hard to tell. The emergency lighting was failing now. flickering on and off, and in the strobing red darkness I could see shapes moving. People running, people crawling, people not moving at all. I got to my feet. Don't ask me how. The human body is a strange thing, capable of functioning even when the mind is screaming at it to stop. My left leg wasn't working properly, dragging behind me as I stumbled forward. The air was thick now, full of smoke and dust and something else, something that burned my throat and made my eyes water. Chemical fire. The textile vats had ruptured. I could see the viscous liquid spreading across the floor, eating through the metal plating, hissing where it touched flesh. Overseer Ven was in it up to his waist, his augmetics sparking and failing as the corrosive slurry dissolved the connections. He was still trying to give orders, his vox amp producing nothing but static and shrieks. The impacts kept coming. I stopped counting after the 7th. They blurred together into one continuous roar, a symphony of destruction that made thought impossible. I was moving on instinct now, following the press of bodies toward what I hoped was an exit. We were packed tight, hundreds of us, all trying to force ourselves through corridors designed for orderly shifts changes. People fell and were trampled. I stepped on someone's hand and felt the bones crack under my boot. I didn't stop, couldn't stop. The crush of bodies behind me would have pushed me forward even if I'd wanted to halt. We were a single organism now, driven by the same blind urge to escape, to survive. Somewhere in that mad scramble I lost Morella. One moment her hand was in mine, fingers locked tight, and the next moment there was just empty air. I looked back but couldn't see her. Couldn't see anything except faces twisted in fear and mouths open in screams I couldn't hear over the roar. The corridor was collapsing behind us, the ceiling coming down in great sheets of rockcrete that flattened whoever was too slow. I saw a man I recognized, Ben from the 3rd shift, reach up to try to hold back a falling support beam. It crushed him flat, reduced him to something that didn't look human anymore, just a spreading red stain beneath tons of rubble. We emerged into a transit shaft, and for a moment I thought we were saved. The shaft was intact, the lift platform still functioning on emergency power, but there were hundreds of us, and the platforms could hold maybe 40 at a time. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Most of us wouldn't make it. I was near the back of the crush, nowhere close to the first platform, and I watched as people fought each other for space. Fists flew. Someone produced a utility knife and started stabbing. The platform lifted with people clinging to its underside, their fingers white-knuckled on the safety rails, and halfway up the shaft something hit it. I don't know what, debris, shrapnel, another shell, but the platform sheared away from its guide rails and fell. The screaming as it dropped past us seemed to go on forever. The next platform was rising. I was closer now, pushed forward by the press of bodies. I could see the operator, a woman in administratum robes, her face blank, as she worked the controls. Mechanical, going through the motions because that's what she'd been trained to do. The platform reached our level, and people surged forward, and I was lifted off my feet by the crowd. For a terrifying moment I thought I'd be crushed, squeezed so tight between bodies that my ribs would crack. But then I was on the platform, somehow, sprawled on the metal grating with dozens of others piled on top of me. The platform shuddered and began to rise. Through the gaps in the bodies above me I could see the shaft walls sliding past, could see the levels we were passing, each one a glimpse into different hells. 46 was flooding, water gushing from broken pipes in black torrents. 45 was on fire, the entire level engulfed in flames that roared out into the shaft like a dragon's breath. 44 was simply gone, just a gaping wound in the hive structure where a shell must have penetrated deep and detonated. I saw the edges of that wound, the twisted metal and shattered stone, and I saw movement in the darkness beyond. Not people, something else. Something with too many limbs and eyes that reflected the firelight. Then we were past it, rising higher, and I told myself I'd imagined it. The platform jerked to a halt at sub-level 30. The operator's vox crackled to life with orders to evacuate here. This level had functioning evacuation routes to the surface. Surface. The word was almost meaningless to someone like me. I'd been born in the underhive. I'd lived my entire life in artificial light, breathing recycled air. The surface was a myth, a place where the worthy lived. But now we were being herded off the platform and into corridors that supposedly led upward, toward that mythical open sky. These corridors were packed, not just with workers from the lower levels, but with everyone: administrators, enforcers, merchants, scribes. The hierarchy of the hive had collapsed. We were all just bodies now, all desperate to escape. The evacuation route was a massive tunnel, wide enough to drive cargo haulers through, and it spiraled upward at a gentle grade. Emergency lighting strips ran along the walls, casting everything in that same hellish red. The air was better here, less smoke, but it was hot, furnace hot. I could feel sweat running down my back, soaking through my work coveralls. Around me people were shedding clothes, stumbling forward in their underlayers, and still the heat kept building. I learned later that the enemy, whoever they were, we never knew for certain, had started using incendiary shells. They were targeting the hive's lower levels, trying to cook us out like vermin from a burrow. The heat rose through the structure, following the ventilation shafts and transit tunnels, turning the entire underhive into an oven. People started dropping, the old first, then the young, then anyone whose body simply couldn't handle the temperature. They'd collapse mid-stride and the crowd would flow around them like water around a stone. No one stopped to help. What help could we offer? What mercy existed here, except the mercy of a quick death? The tunnel went on forever. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time lost meaning. There was only the next step, and the step after that, and the endless spiral upward. My leg had stopped hurting, gone numb, which I knew was a bad sign. I could feel something wet running down into my boot, and I knew it was blood, but I couldn't stop to check. Stopping meant being trampled. Stopping meant death. So I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, mechanical as any servitor. We passed corpses. Hundreds of them. They lined the walls where people had tried to rest and simply not gotten up again. Some showed signs of violent stab wounds, crushed skulls. In the midst of catastrophe, humanity's worst instincts emerged. Food was scarce, water was non-existent. People killed for a sip from someone else's canteen, for a ration bar, for the clothes on another's back. I saw an enforcer, still in his carapace armor, beating a woman to death with his shock maul for a half-eaten protein brick. When he was done, he was set upon by a pack of Juves, who tore him apart with their bare hands and fought over his armor like scavenger birds. The bombardment continued above us. We could feel each impact, tremors that ran through the tunnel structure. Dust rained down constantly, getting in my eyes, my mouth. I was coughing now, harsh, hacking coughs that brought up dark phlegm. Everyone was coughing. The sound of it echoed up and down the tunnel, a chorus of diseased lungs struggling to process air that was more particulate than oxygen. Someone near me started coughing up blood, then someone else, then me. I tasted copper and felt warm liquid on my chin. Dust inhalation, probably. Respiratory damage. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered, except keeping moving. Sub-level 20. The markers on the wall told us we were getting higher. But the tunnel was narrowing now, or maybe it was just more crowded. The press of bodies was getting worse. People were panicking, pushing harder, and in the crush, someone fell. Then someone else tripped over them. Then the whole mass of us was stumbling, falling, piling up like a wave breaking against a shore. I went down hard, someone's elbow catching me in the temple. Stars burst across my vision. Bodies landed on top of me, driving me flat against the floor. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only lie there as tons of human flesh pressed down and the last of my air escaped in a wheeze. This is how I die, I remember thinking. Crushed under the weight of my fellow citizens, the Emperor's mercy. But somehow the pile shifted. Bodies rolled away. A hand grabbed my collar and hauled me upward. I found myself staring into the face of a priest, his robes torn and bloody, his augmetic eye flickering with dying power. He said nothing, just pulled me to my feet and pushed me forward. Then he was gone, swallowed back into the crowd. I never saw him again. I like to think he made it. I like to think someone in all that chaos performed one good act and lived to remember it. Sub-level 10. We were close now. I could feel it, a change in the air, a slight movement that wasn't just the stirring of bodies, real air, fresh air. From somewhere above, I could hear sounds that weren't explosions or screams. Machinery, the groaning of massive gears. We were approaching one of the main gates, one of the enormous portals that allowed access to the hive's exterior. They were opening the gates, letting us out. The tunnel mouth was chaos. Enforcers were trying to maintain order, their shock mauls rising and falling, cracking skulls and breaking bones of anyone who pushed too hard. But there were thousands of us, and only dozens of them. The line broke. The crowd surged forward in a stampede, and the enforcers were swept aside, their armor offering no protection against the sheer mass of desperate humanity. I was carried forward on that wave, my feet barely touching the ground, and then suddenly there was space, room to breathe, room to move, and light, real light, bright and harsh and painful. I'd never seen the sun before. Not the real sun. The lumens in the hive were pale imitations, cold and flickering. This was different. This burned. I raised my hand to shield my eyes and stumbled forward onto what I realized was ash. Grey ash, inches deep, that rose in clouds with every footfall. The ground beneath it was warm. Hot even. I looked around, trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to process what the surface actually looked like. It looked like the end of the world. The hive rose behind us, a mountain of metal and stone that stretched up until it disappeared into smoke-choked clouds. Fires burned everywhere across its surface, thousands of them, like candles on some obscene altar. Pieces of it were falling, great sections of wall and spire that plummeted down and hit the ash plains with impacts that sent shockwaves rolling across the landscape. The sky was the color of a bruise, purple-black and roiling, and across that sky I could see them. Ships, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, hanging in orbit like patient birds of prey. As I watched, one of them flickered with light along its flank, and seconds later, another section of the hive exploded. They were systematically destroying it, level by level, section by section, grinding the entire structure to powder. And we were just ants, fleeing a burning nest, scattering across the ash plains in our thousands. No, our hundreds of thousands. I could see the crowds spreading out in all directions, dark masses against the grey ash. Some were running, most were walking, stumbling, crawling. Many were simply lying down where they'd emerged and not getting up again. I kept moving because I didn't know what else to do. There was no destination. No plan, just movement for its own sake, the last vestige of the survival instinct that had carried me this far. My leg was definitely broken now, the bone grinding with each step, but the pain seemed distant, abstract. I was watching myself from outside my body, observing this damaged thing that had once been me as it limped across the ash. How interesting, I thought. How strange. That person should stop. That person should rest. But I kept walking. Day became night, became day again. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the sky was just that dark, the smoke that thick. I lost track. Lost the ability to distinguish between sleep and waking. Sometimes I'd find myself walking and have no memory of how I'd gotten there. Sometimes I'd come back to awareness to find myself sitting in the ash with hours missing from my memory. The bombardment continued. I could see the flashes on the horizon, could feel the rumble through the ground, but it was moving away, targeting different sections of the hive. Or maybe there were other hives. Maybe they were destroying everything. Maybe the whole world was ending and we just hadn't realized it yet. I found water on the third day, a crater where a shell had struck and ruptured an underground aquifer. The water was grey and tasted of minerals and chemicals, but it was water. I drank until I vomited, then drank more. Others had found it too. We clustered around the crater's edge like animals at a watering hole, and like animals we fought. Someone tried to push me away from the water, and I hit them with a rock. Didn't think about it, didn't plan it. Just picked up a rock and swung, and their skull caved in with a wet crack. They fell into the water and floated there, face down, and I stepped over them to drink more. This is what we'd become. This is what survival required. I met a man that night. Or he met me. I was lying in the ash, too exhausted to move, and he sat down beside me. He was old, face lined and scarred, missing his left arm at the elbow. He stared at the burning hive on the horizon and spoke, though I'm not sure if he was talking to me or to himself. He said he'd worked in the administratum, in the census department, processing the tithes of bodies that the Imperium required. Billions of names had passed through his cogitators, billions of lives reduced to numbers, to statistics, to quotas that had to be met. He said he used to wonder about those numbers sometimes, used to think of them as people, but the thinking had been trained out of him eventually. They weren't people. They were resources, units of production. The Imperium required bodies, and the hive provided them, and it was all just mathematics. Now he was a number himself, a casualty statistic, a unit lost. He found it funny, in a way that had nothing to do with humor. He laughed, a dry rasping sound, and then he stopped talking. I think he died. I didn't check, just closed my eyes and tried to sleep, and when I woke he was still there beside me, not moving, already starting to disappear under a thin layer of ash. The orbital bombardment stopped on the 5th day. The silence was shocking. I'd grown so accustomed to the constant thunder that its absence felt wrong, like something vital had been removed from the world. The sky was still dark, still choked with smoke, but the ships were gone. I could see contrails as they departed, rising up through the atmosphere toward whatever hell had spawned them. They'd done what they came to do. The hive was dead. Not destroyed entirely, sections still stood, jutting up from the ash like broken teeth. But it was hollow now, empty. Whatever had made it alive was gone. People started trying to return. I watched them from my position in the ash, watched the lines of survivors making their way back toward the ruins. What were they hoping to find? Their homes were gone. Their workstations were rubble. The administratum offices that had registered their existence were vaporized. But still they went, drawn by some instinct to return to the familiar, even when the familiar was nothing but corpses and collapse. I didn't go with them. I'd seen enough of the hive to last multiple lifetimes. Instead, I started walking in the other direction, away from the ruins, toward what? I didn't know. Didn't care. There were others doing the same. Small groups forming, moving across the ash plains toward the horizon. Maybe there were other settlements out there, other hives. Maybe there was some place that hadn't been reduced to fire and rubble, or maybe we'd just walk until we died. Either way, it was movement. It was choice, of a sort, which was more than I'd had for most of my life. I walked for 6 more days. The ash gave way to hardpan, then to patches of toxic scrubland where twisted vegetation grew in unnatural colors. I saw ruins sometimes, old structures that predated the hive, the bones of whatever civilization had existed before the Imperium came and built its monument to efficiency. Sometimes I saw people, sometimes I saw other things, things that might have been people once, mutants, changed by the world's radiation, by the poisons in the air and water. They watched us from a distance but didn't approach. Smart, we had nothing to offer except disease and desperation. My leg had gone septic. I could smell it, the sweet rot stench of infected flesh. The skin was black from knee to ankle, swollen to twice its normal size. I should have been dead already, should have been consumed by fever, by shock, by the simple failure of a body pushed beyond all reasonable limits. But I kept walking. That's what you do, isn't it? When there's nothing else left, when every other option has been stripped away, you keep moving, one foot in front of the other. Mechanical, purposeful, meaningless. I collapsed on the 7th day. Just fell forward mid-stride and didn't get up. Couldn't get up. My body had finally reached its limit, had exhausted every reserve, burned through every last scrap of energy. I lay in the dust and watched the sky and waited for death. It seemed peaceful, honestly, a relief. I'd survived the bombardment, only to die out here in the wasteland, and there was a kind of justice in that, a fitting end for someone who'd spent their whole life serving the Imperium's machines. I'd be recycled by nature instead of by the corpse grinders. The local scavengers would pick my bones clean and scatter them, and eventually even those would turn to dust. I'd become part of the world's ash, indistinguishable from the million other dead. Perfect anonymity, perfect peace. But death didn't come. Instead, I heard engines, felt vibrations through the ground. Something large was approaching. I managed to turn my head enough to see them: cargo haulers, massive 8-wheeled vehicles with Mechanicus markings. They were moving across the wasteland in a convoy, and they were stopping to collect survivors. Not out of mercy. The Imperium doesn't do mercy. They were salvaging us, gathering up the useful bodies for processing, for reassignment, for whatever purpose the machine god required. A servitor was approaching me now, its augmetic legs carrying it with mechanical precision. It bent down, scanned me with clicking sensors, and I saw the readout on its chest display: viable, salvageable, suitable for conversion. The servitor lifted me with arms that had once been human, carried me toward the nearest hauler where dozens of other survivors were being loaded like cargo. I wanted to resist, to fight, to scream that I'd earned my death, that I deserved the peace of oblivion. But I couldn't move, could barely think. The servitor placed me in the hauler's hold and moved away to collect the next body. All around me I could see them, survivors from the bombardment, and all of us wore the same expression: hollow, empty, the look of people who'd discovered that survival was just another form of damnation. The hauler's engines rumbled to life. The hold was dark except for a single flickering lumen, and in its light I could see the other passengers more clearly. Most were injured. Many wouldn't survive the journey to wherever we were going. But that didn't matter. The Mechanicus would use every part. Nothing would be wasted. That's the glory of the Imperium, isn't it? That's the wisdom of the God Emperor. Everything serves. Everything has purpose. There is no escape, not even in death. We drove for hours, days maybe. Hard to tell in the darkness of the hold. People died around me. I heard their last breaths, felt their bodies go cold and still. The servitors would come and remove them, efficient and emotionless, making space for the living. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my fever building, my infection spreading. In my delirium, I dreamed of the textile works, of the looms and the thread and the endless repetitive motion of feeding fiber into machines. I'd hated it while I lived it. Every second had been torture, monotonous and mind-numbing. Now I missed it with a longing that was almost physical. That life had been predictable, safe, in its way. I'd known what each day would bring. I'd known my place in the order of things. Now I knew nothing, had nothing, was nothing except a damaged body being transported to some facility where I'd be remade into something more useful. A servitor, probably. They'd scoop out my brain and replace it with cogitators, wire my nervous system to machine spirits, turn me into something that couldn't dream or remember or suffer. Maybe that would be better. Maybe that would be the mercy that death had denied me. The hauler stopped. The rear door opened and light flooded in, harsh and white. I could hear voices, human ones, giving orders. The surviving passengers were being unloaded, sorted, processed. The Mechanicus works with admirable efficiency. We were categorized within minutes: those suitable for augmentation, those useful for labor, those who would be recycled for raw materials. I fell into the first category. My injuries were severe, but my core organs were intact. My brain showed normal function on their scanners. I was prime servitor material. They took me to the conversion facility. I remember fragments of the journey corridors lined with pipes and cables, the smell of sacred oils and human waste, the sound of prayers in binary and high Gothic. I remember being placed on a cold metal slab. Remember restraints closing around my wrists and ankles and neck. Remember a tech priest looming over me, his face more machine than flesh, his eyes replaced with targeting arrays that clicked and whirred as they focused. He spoke, but I couldn't understand the words. My mind was fragmenting, reality breaking apart into disconnected pieces. The last thing I remember as fully human was the sound. They activated the conversion machinery, and it filled the air with a symphony of grinding and drilling and cutting. My symphony, the sound of my transformation from person to property, from individual to instrument. I tried to scream, but the restraint around my neck cut off my air. I tried to struggle, but the bindings held me perfectly immobile. I could only lie there as the machines descended, as the first cuts were made, as the tech priests began their sacred work of improvement. That was 3 months ago, or 3 years, or 3 decades. Time is different now, measured in tasks completed rather than moments experienced. I am Servitor Unit 47 Theta 926, assigned to maintenance duties in Subsector 7 of the Manufactorum Complex. My days are identical: receive orders, execute orders, return to charging station, repeat. I perform my functions with optimal efficiency. My satisfaction quotient remains at approved levels. All is well. All is right. All serves the glory of the Omnissiah. But sometimes, in the microseconds between tasks, something flickers in the cognitive centers they didn't quite manage to excise. A ghost of memory. A fragment of that person I used to be. And in those microseconds I remember the bombardment. Remember the flames and the screaming and the desperate flight through the darkness. Remember what it felt like to be afraid, to be hopeful, to be anything other than this. And I understand, with a clarity that cuts through all the conditioning and programming and neural modification, that I survived the bombardment only to discover that some fates are worse than death. The machines hum around me, eternal and uncaring. My augmetic limbs move with precision, performing tasks I don't remember choosing. The other servitors labor beside me in perfect synchronization, and none of us speak because we've forgotten how. We are the Imperium's answer to the loss of that hive. We are the recycled remnants of sub-level 47, repurposed and reformed. We are what survival looks like in the grim darkness of the far future. And somewhere, in the deepest core of what remains of my consciousness, buried beneath layers of machine code and behavioral programming, the person I used to be is screaming, has been screaming since the moment the conversion began, will be screaming until the day these augmetics finally fail and I'm recycled once again, broken down for parts to repair other servitors, my components scattered across 1,000 different units. There will be no death for me, no peace, no ending. Just an eternity of service, degrading slowly, transformed incrementally, until even this last fragment of memory is ground away. But for now, it remains. This tiny piece of humanity, trapped and aware. A prisoner in a body that's no longer mine, performing an existence I didn't choose. And I understand now what the Imperium truly is. Not an empire, not a civilization, not a bulwark against the darkness. It's a machine, a vast, grinding, merciless machine that consumes people and produces only more of itself. It took the hive I lived in and reduced it to rubble. It took the survivors of that disaster and reduced us to components. It will keep grinding, keep consuming, keep processing, until every world is ash, and every person is either dead or converted. And it will call this victory, will call this preservation, will call this the Emperor's will. The work shift continues. My manipulator appendages perform their assigned tasks. The overhead monitors display productivity quotas, and I see that I'm exceeding expectations. Optimal performance. Exemplary function. The tech priests will be pleased. Perhaps they'll apply lubricant to my joints. Perhaps they'll perform maintenance ahead of schedule. Small rewards for good service. This is what I have to look forward to now. This is what I survived for. Somewhere in the Manufactorum, an alarm sounds. Not the bombardment's roar. I'd know that sound across any distance, in any form. This is different. Rhythmic. Procedural. A call to morning prayer. The servitors pause in their labors and turn toward the speakers as the recorded liturgy begins. The Omnissiah's wisdom fills the air. We listen because we're programmed to listen, because it's efficient, because everything in the Imperium has its place and its purpose and its time, and I listen too, this ghost inside the machine. I listen and I remember sub-level 47, remember the textile works, remember Morella's hand in mine during those last seconds before the world ended. I remember being human. I remember being alive. I remember everything the Imperium took from me, everything it ground down and reformed and repurposed for its own continuation. This is what it's like to survive a Hive bombardment. To live through the death of everything you knew and emerge on the other side transformed. To discover that the body keeps functioning even when the soul is screaming. To learn that in the Imperium of Man, there are things that survival cannot save you from. That sometimes the greatest mercy would be obliteration, complete and final. That sometimes the bombardment isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Sometimes survival is. The prayer ends. The machines resume their rhythms. Work continues, because work must always continue. The Imperium grinds on, eternal and absolute, and I grind with it, a single grain of sand in a machine so vast it encompasses galaxies. Useful, efficient, optimal, screaming, always screaming, forever.